Hello, I'm Lucy.
And I'm Michelle.
Welcome to another episode of Tudoriferous, the biographical podcast that examines lives in the Tudor era.
And today, dun, 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 the rise and fall of the Medici Bank.
Yes.
Ooh, we get to see just how much Maximilian and everybody else bankrupted them. Oops.
Well, yeah, we're back in Italy. We seem to spend an awful lot of time in Italy.
The Pope's there.
Yeah.
That's probably why.
Yeah, and all the money's there. Well, not all the money. I suppose most of it's under Henry's bed, isn't it? Anyway, welcome to our occasional series on where the money comes from. And it's so occasional, we've only actually done one other episode several years ago on Jacob Fugger. So here's part two. Now, before we home in on the Medici, I thought we'd look at banking in general, particularly at this point, usury.
Yes.
Because usury is not something Christians were meant to do.
No, that's why the Jewish did it, because they didn't have laws against usury.
Well, it turns out, I'll come to that in a minute, I was about to say neither do we. Neither do Christians, really.
What?
But anyway, we'll come to that in a second. Because you weren't meant to do it as a Christian, according to the church,
Yes.
you could expiate your sins by leaving a gift to your community in your will. Or just by buying stuff and putting it out, putting it out for the community. So we can thank a feeling of guilt for the many treasures of the Renaissance. If they hadn't felt so damn guilty, we probably wouldn't have all those beautiful things
Buildings
from the
and
Renaissance.
stuff. Yes.
Yes. And it's not surprising they were so keen to show remorse, since usurers were denied a Christian burial.
Really?
Quote, their bodies should be buried in ditches together with dogs and cattle, unquote.
Ooh, that's harsh.
Why would you bury anything in a ditch? I was thinking about that when I typed that. I thought, because...
That ditch is there for a reason, for one thing.
Yeah, you're filling in your ditch. And why are you burying cattle? Why aren't you eating them?
Well, you can't eat diseased flesh, so
You
I'm
can't
assuming...
eat diseased, yeah. But still, you wouldn't put it in a ditch. Especially, if your water supply might be coming from that ditch. Anyway.
And do you not love your dog and put up a little plaque for them? And
apparently not.
Forever?
You shove it in a ditch. In 1478, in Piacenza, there was a massive rainstorm just after a usurer had been buried in the churchyard.
Ah.
Yes.
Here we
and
go.
That can't have been coincidence. So he was dug up, hanged, and his body thrown into the river.
Oh, that's harsh. You don't just dig them up. You have to re-hang or hang them for the first time. What is wrong with people?
I don't know.
That poor family.
I presume it stopped raining after that. Otherwise, they must have felt pretty stupid, mustn't they? Just thought, still raining.
Not
Maybe
cool.
It wasn't him after all. Maybe it's a natural feature of the climate.
No, what they would have said was, we need to do something worse to him. We didn't get enough.
Yeah, pogrom. Here we go.
Go find another usurer and actually hang them.
Well, why was everyone so against usurers? Especially given that lots of people needed to borrow money.
Yes.
I mean, many needed a loan to get on in life, to buy some land or to buy a loom or a ship or something.
Yes. Food.
Well, yeah, but it kept the wheels of commerce and trade and artisanship moving. I checked the biblical aspect of this, which surprised me, which is why I said it wasn't as sinful as I was expecting. Exodus chapter 22, verse 25, forbids the lending of money and charging interest to a poor person.
Well, do rich people really need to borrow?
Well, yes, they do. We know they do. But I suppose...
They don't need to borrow. If you're rich, you can just borrow for fun. I want a boat.
We've come across people who have to borrow to pay off their debts.
Yes.
And
but that was
they're ostensibly rich people. But anyway, quote, if you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a moneylender to him, and you shall not exact interest from him, unquote. So, yeah, poor people specifically.
Okay.
Not just everybody, poor people.
But you could lend it to them as long as you don't extract interest?
If you don't charge interest, yeah. Because
Okay.
lending money is fine.
Yeah, it's just the
Just the interest.
That's the bad thing. Okay. Then every bank now should be excommunicated.
Yes. Yes.
Hey, church, listen. We need to have a discussion.
Every mortgage provider, loan provider, all of those, what they call loyalty cards in...
Yeah. Nasty parents.
Yes. Yeah, I don't charge interest. Not much, anyway. Just the normal 25%.
A friend of mine told me that her dad charged her interest when she borrowed money when she was a kid. I was like, what?
Yeah, I can see my dad saying that, because he'd say, you can be learning what life is really like, but I can't imagine him actually doing it. No. Anyway, Leviticus chapter 25, verse 37. You shall not lend your brother your money at interest, unquote. I don't know if it means literally your brother or brotherhood of man.
Yeah. Well, brotherhood of Christians.
Yes. Yes. Deuteronomy 23, verse 20 says you shouldn't lend with interest to others in the Jewish community. But if they're a foreigner, knock yourself out.
Interesting. So that's God realizing you need to make money.
Yeah. And that's implying that interest per se isn't sinful as long as the borrower is rich and or foreign.
Yes.
But by the time we're talking about, the church has said it is sinful. So either they've found other books in the Bible that say something different, or they've just,
you don't see purgatory mentioned anywhere in the Bible.
No. Or indulgences.
No.
No.
So yeah, well done, Catholic Church. I'm sorry to every Catholic out there.
Well, it's not your fault. There were more practical reasons to dislike usury. It was partly that usury didn't leave anything concrete behind. So how can you tax a man like that? You couldn't count his assets. It wasn't as if he had so many heads of cattle or bales of wool. He just had money or the promise of money.
I get that from a government point of view, but what does the church have to do with that? Or do they base their tithes based on their income? No. Why does that matter to the church?
I'm talking about why people dislike usurers in general.
Oh, okay.
I mean, obviously the church have come down again them, but so has everybody else. And yeah, the money might not be in the form of cool, hard coins of the type that our friend on Patreon, Sigismund of Tyrol, asked to be covered with when he was dying of fever. And as we'll see in a bit, it might be in the form of a letter of credit.
Right.
And as we heard in Henry's Millions episode, it might be in the form of a wooden tanny stick.
Right.
And just a quick tangent here. We got a message from Melinda Hornton, one of our Patreon chums, who picked up on what I said about tanny sticks perishing in the fire of the Houses of Parliament. And she said that this is what caused the fire. Someone was wondering why they were hanging on to all these old sticks in the Houses of Parliament.
And decided to burn
them. And they set fire to the Houses of Parliament.
You couldn't take them outside far away
it was
from
cold
the
out there.
Oh my goodness, that's so dumb. I don't like this window. Break.
One thing that history teaches you is that people aren't as bright as you'd like to think they are, like we'd like to think we are. What to think of usury was a real dilemma for people at the time. Usury was sinful for everyone, as the church had now decided, not just poor people. Money was the root of all evil. It was easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor. God could hardly have made his position more clear.
Yeah.
Rich bad, poor good.
Money is the root of all evil? Is that actually in the Bible?
Love of money, isn't it? Love of money is the root of all evil.
Interesting.
And yet, in real life, to be poor was to be reviled, and to be rich was to be honoured.
Yes.
That's why people are happy to pay for indulgences. Being in a position to pay meant being able to buy your way out of purgatory.
Yes.
And since the more you paid, the more purgatory-free years you could hope for, then surely being rich must be okay, spiritually.
Yeah.
As usual, they've got themselves completely enmeshed in religious spaghetti, as we keep finding.
Cognitive dissonance, isn't that what that's called? Believing two completely opposite ideals and assuming, like, your brain makes that weird pretzel-like thought pattern, making it make sense to you. And you can accept it.
You can go to heaven after all, it turns out.
Yeah.
There were other ways of hiding the usury aspect, especially when dealing with the clergy. The interest could take the form of a gift. A thank you for lending me the money gift.
Aww.
Here's a little something for yourself. That little something would invariably be between 8 and 12%, but it definitely wasn't interest.
Oh, loophole. Do you think God sees these loopholes, people?
No, they're so secretive and subtle.
God will never figure this one out.
I think they're just getting themselves in more trouble trying to trick God.
Yeah, again, cognitive dissonance. God knows everything, but he won't know this.
Well, just to make sure it wasn't usury, there was the added aspect that maybe you wouldn't get the gift. Maybe the borrower would default on the payment or forget to include the gift. And it would only be usury if you were sure of receiving interest.
But then what about the guys going around to beat you up for that interest? Where's my money? I gave you your money. No, the rest of my money. What money?
But they still might not pay, so it's still, it's still a lottery. It's not a foregone conclusion, which is what interest has to be. And although the government in Florence issued laws which said that the promised gift must be paid, which must have put the bankers in an awkward position, they're saying, no. What was the point of us getting into this mess if you're just going to ruin it all?
Because now I've got to give all that interest to somebody else in order to get me out of hell.
It's nice to know the gift was backed by law, but what did it do to the uncertainty stops it being usury get-out clause? But the trouble was this ambiguity led to a field day for lawyers, a bonanza of litigation in a time that was awash with litigation anyway. The last thing you need to do is more litigation. In Florence, pawnbrokers were often fined 2,000 florins a year. No more, no less. The set amount and the regularity of the payment, does that actually amount to a licence to trade rather than a fine?
Wait, pawnbrokers?
PAWN, not PORN.
But not, I thought we were going after people who just lend money. It's an exchange of goods. That's not lending.
Yeah. If you try and retrieve your goods, you have to pay more for it than you gave them.
Yes, but
so that's interest.
They're like, no, there's a goods being exchanged. The other ones are just giving money. Go after them. Don't go after me. I'm just a plain pawnbroker.
Well, they didn't have to stop trading if they'd been fined. And they couldn't be fined again that year.
So you just had to make enough interest to pay off the fine, which is sort of like paying a business license.
It is exactly like it. It's more like as if the Florentine council is saying, we want a cut of your business, but we can't say so because it's usury, but we could fine you because then we've got the moral high ground.
That's a higher business license than most business licenses in my city.
Yes. Yeah. But they're saying, please carry on trading because we would like another cut next year.
Huh.
I mean, everybody's in it. Everybody's in this deception. Pawnbrokers couldn't join a guild because they were obviously usurers. Bankers could join a guild because they were better at hiding the usury.
Bankers don't need a guild.
It was in 1437 that Christians were banned from pawnbroking, but it didn't seem to make the slightest bit of difference. It seems, we always hear that at this time everybody was, the church was your father and your mother and your policeman and your guide. And it seems that in reality, nobody took any notice of it.
No.
I mean, we've seen with Henry in the alum trade. He was risking excommunication, but he thought, yeah, but it's money, come on.
It's fine.
Anyway, on to the nitty-gritty of Renaissance banking. I found this really interesting. The letters of credit that we came across in Leonardo's episode, you get a letter from your bank in Florence to say you're good for the money, and then hand it over to a bank in Milan in exchange for the money, actually came about because of the dangers of travelling with money.
Okay.
So someone, somewhere, obviously sick of being relieved of his purse every time he set foot outside the city, thought, well, there's got to be a better way than this. So letters of credit were invented. And there's an interesting Renaissance equivalent to fingerprints or voice recognition.
Oh, is it the stamp of their ring thing?
No, a borrower would have to get the representative of the bank in Florence to write a cambiale, or bill of exchange. Quote, in the year of our Lord 1485, August the 22nd, in Florence, pay as is the custom, 1,000 florins at 40 pence to the florin, to whoever is appointed by Lorenzo de' Medici and partners in London. May Christ protect you, unquote. And the representative would sign this, but it's not just the signature that the bank in London would be interested in, it's the whole letter. So the English branch of the bank would have a sample of this man's writing, the representative of the bank in Florence.
They had not heard of a forgery yet?
Well, the thing is that a signature could be forged, but it's much harder to forge an entire letter.
Yes, that's true, I think.
And it, since yeah.
I was about to say, yes, that's totally true. I've never tried to forge even a signature, so I couldn't even say. Would it be harder?
The fact that the writing is the same each time, there's a set form that these things are done. You can say, oh, hang on a minute, look, their F is a bit weird, and they write their G's backwards like I do.
You'd have to be really careful every time you wrote that letter, though, because I know the faster I try to write, the worse and stranger my handwriting goes.
Oh, yes. When you get handed those machines and you're a plastic pen, and you're told, oh, put your signature in that box, and you think,
yes.
Well, that's nothing like my signature.
No.
All across Europe, each of the branches have a sample of all the other tellers of all the other banks.
Handwriting.
Writing, yeah.
Interesting.
And again, this is the rate of exchange of being tweaked a little to hide the interest, because 1,000 florins at 40 pence might be a bit steep, but that takes into account that little bit extra. It's not usury, just an astronomical rate of exchange.
Jeez. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it would be lost in the exchange rate, because as we said, where we're getting our coins from is different qualities, even though they're called the same thing. So yes, I'm going to give you 40 shillings over here, but when I get 40 shillings over there, I actually get more money because there's more silver content.
Yeah.
That would be so difficult.
Yeah, and how, given that it takes a while for news to filter across Europe, and if the rate of exchange is changing due to various economic problems in various places, how are you to keep up with what the exchange rate is anyway?
Yeah, you're gambling.
You're effectively guessing, I should think.
Yeah. I'm going to guess that I'm going to get this much more back in the quality of the coins.
And then I'm going to add a bit.
Yeah.
For luck.
Yes. Sounds like insurance.
Yeah. But this is not a loan with interest. I want to make that perfectly clear, because a loan with interest is usury. It's an exchange deal with a little extra added for your trouble. So the exchange rate could change, meaning that even the extra wouldn't be enough to ensure a profit, or it could change in their favour and the poor borrower would be paying through the nose. So that risk was also considered to take it out of the usury category. You're back in the gambling lottery idea, which stops it from being usury. And everybody knows gambling's all right because Margaret Beaufort does it.
When she should be going to do a pilgrimage.
Well, she's very religious.
Sorry.
And bankers were all religious men because they consulted theologians to check, is this usury? Are we going to hell? And the theologians said that as long as it was an exchange deal based on a real exchange rate, your immortal soul should be all right. So, yeah, the bankers must have shuffled their feet a bit and thought,
God will never see this.
Yeah, a real exchange rate. Okay. Yeah, okay. That's fine, thank you. And the part of the bill that says, as is the custom, pay as is the custom, 1,000 florins at 40 pence, etc. That refers to the length of time before the borrower has to pay back the money, and it's based on how long it takes to get to the country where you want to complete the transaction. So this is interesting because it tells you how long it would be expected to take someone to travel across Europe.
Yeah.
And it's the maximum length of time to allow for rough crossings and mishaps of various types.
Interesting.
So Florence to Venice, 10 days.
10 days, that's it.
I suppose you don't have to cross water or anything, do you? Well, apart from
No.
in Venice, I suppose.
And I guess you'd have to be on horseback.
Yeah.
Okay. In my head, I'm just seeing people walking. I'm like, no, they don't travel like that.
Power walking across quickly. I've got to get there. I can't sleep. Well, Florence to Bruges is 60 days. Florence to London, 90 days. And that's allowing for the fact that no one at this time can cross the channel at the first attempt. So you've got to add a bit.
I wonder how many days on horseback it would take to get from Newfoundland to BC.
Well, you could work it out.
I could Google it, you mean?
Shh, you could work it out.
Nope, nobody's asked that question.
Oh.
Okay. I need a calculator. I'll give you the answer by the end of the podcast.
Okay, I'll carry on then. If there isn't a Medici bank in the place you want to return the money, you can go to a rival bank and they'll complete the transaction. Because the Italian banks had reciprocal arrangements that they deal with each other's business. Because they couldn't have branches everywhere. But this meant that banking had to be international and it had to be harnessed to trade. If someone came to the bank in Florence and said they wanted to set up a business in Florence and they needed the money, that wouldn't be possible because there's no way of hiding the usury in such a deal. Because you're saying, right, well, here's 60 florins. Mm-hmm. They say, yeah, okay, well, come back in a year and give us 80 florins. And let's think, well, what's this extra 20 florins for? There had to be an exchange rate to hide behind. I don't know what happened in that circumstance, whether a businessman would have to take a trip to Milan or somewhere just to set up a business in his hometown of Florence, but I don't know. One of the main reasons for carrying money about the place was the tithes flowing to Rome from all over Christendom. To be late paying risked excommunication, but then they threw around excommunication like confetti, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
So really, it was the church which stimulated innovations in banking, which just added further complexity to the God versus mammon dichotomy. Payments of tithes meant a need for branches of banks to be located all over Europe. And the clergy were more reliant on bankers than the lay population, since they weren't meant to use land as an investment.
Oh, why?
The land is for the church. A church can buy land. An individual clergyman can't.
Oh, but they did.
Well, we know that these people didn't always follow the rules, but if the Pope found out you bought land, he could confiscate it. And
Okay.
he most certainly would.
I have the answer.
Okay, go on then.
275.7 days on horseback.
Well, that's quite a holiday, isn't it? I mean, you're going to have to take
you a
some
year.
time off.
Partly because there doesn't appear... that's overland. They'd probably go faster if they were on rivers and stuff. Maybe. I don't know. That's based on a horse being able to go 20 kilometers per hour.
All
So
day,
that's
every
full
day.
out, all day, every day. Relays? Drop off a horse here, pick up a horse there.
Well, that's what it used to be. Anyway, the clergy needed to keep their money safe because it's all very well being a Borgia under the Borgia Pope. But what
Yes.
happens when the Borgia Pope dies?
Which is going to happen because you keep picking old men.
You do. And you get a Della Rovere or a Medici instead. Ooh. And also the clergy needed money just like anyone else. I mean, how were you going to buy your cardinal's hat or Pope purple slippers without money?
Pope purple slippers.
As we heard in Katerina's episode over on Patreon, you could get your mum to buy them, but not all of them had amenable mums, so... Yes, do you remember her horrible son who was writing to her when she was in a
Yes, I do.
dungeon? In a dungeon. saying, Mom, can I have some money for my purple
She's
my
like, I would
gardener's
like some
hat?"
sunlight, son.
Yes. I'd like to know I was going to get out of here alive. Frankly,
You
I'm
have
not interested in what you dressed up
me
as.
beyond all measure. You are a horrible son.
Anyway, yes, if you want to hear about that, it's Patreon. And if you want to hear why he has every reason to feel a little bit miffed with his mum, that's also on Patreon.
Well, a little bit miffed.
Tudoriferous Patreon. I wear nothing else.
The Medici always made sure they had close ties to the papacy. And this meant that if a pope was dependent on them for whether he could wage war, like the nice Christian gentleman he is,
Yes.
or build palaces, the Medici were in a very strong position.
Yes. You would think their first thing would be, okay, I want you to declare that all my family in perpetuity would never end up in hell. That's the first demand.
They might have tried that, for all I know, yes.
If I believed in hell, that would have been, and I believe the Pope could get me out of hell, that would have been the first thing. I'll give you anything you want if I can not be in hell, please.
Like getting your 3 wishes and your first one being, I want an infinite number of wishes.
Yes.
Yeah. Nobody ever does that, do they?
There's probably a clause saying you can't.
Yeah. The Medici might even suggest whom the Pope should appoint as bishop. And maybe, and this would be purely on merit, mind, maybe the Medici should become bishop. At the start of the Medici Bank, during the time of Giovanni de' Medici and Cosimo.
I'm sorry, say his name again?
Giovanni de' Medici. de' Medici.
Awesome. I love that. He just needs to change his first name a bit to Ichi.
Ichi de' Bici.
Medici. I love that. That would have been a great name.
Yeah, he doesn't sound like the sort of person that you can walk up to and laugh at his name, frankly. I don't think. No. In their time, over half the transactions were with Rome.
Wow.
But the Pope, being the Pope, could get away with giving his bankers things other than money. Like the finger of John the Baptist, for instance.
Oh, God. I still think that is the creepiest thing ever. I'm going to give you a dead person's body part. I don't care if they're part of a saint. That's, unbelievably cringy.
I suppose it's got sale value, though, isn't it? You can get rid of it.
There was a movie where somebody gave a little kid a piece of a body part.
What films are you watching?
Like the Addams Family. Didn't somebody give Pugsley a piece of something? A piece of someone?
I don't know that. I was going to suggest the Addams Family film for my granddaughter, but I'm not sure now if they're giving bits of body parts away. But, there's a tangible concrete illustration of the changing pattern of trade. Because the Mercato Vecchio, the old market, sold silk and grain and spices and that sort of thing, and it must have looked and smelt beautiful.
Yeah.
The Mercato Nuovo, the new market, was full of bankers.
Oh, that's not a market.
No, they probably don't
not a
look or
market.
smell nice at all.
No, it smells like metal and greed.
Yes. Another interesting aspect was the use of coins. Because these days in Britain, you can have 100 pence made of copper coins, and that makes up £1, which is made of nickel and brass. And 5 of these will get you a fiver, which is made of paper or plastic these days. But not so in 15th century banking. Silver and gold were 2 entirely different things. You couldn't say a certain number of silver coins equaled a gold coin, because that would be like saying a certain number of apples equaled an orange.
Really?
Yeah.
That
Yeah, I went down an awful lot of rabbit holes to do this episode.
That's a weird statement.
Yeah, with every transaction you had to work out the fluctuation of the worth of silver versus gold, and it would vary. They did make their lives much more complicated than they need be, I think.
But that makes sense. I mean, if you just look at the stock market, silver and gold are 2 very different prices. So basically, it's the stock market, but it's based on coinage, because they actually had gold and silver in them.
Yeah. and not pretend
Oh,
pretend
yeah.
stuff. Like we live in a pretend world of invisible stuff.
Yes, our loonie sort of looks like it's gold. It's not gold. A loonie is $1.
Oh,
or
right.
one-
Okay.
Well, it's worth much less than £1. I think it's half of your £1, but it's supposed to be $1. And a toonie is $2.
All right. Well, there we go. The piccioli was a cheap little coin used by the masses. The florin was for rich people. And that wasn't just that your average peasant or minor trader wouldn't have enough piccioli to convert into a florin. He couldn't even aspire to spending florins. They weren't for the likes of him.
Really?
But what the peasant didn't realise was the piccioli was declining in worth while the florin was increasing.
Oh, so you're
the
getting
poor were getting
poorer
poorer
without...
and the rich were
Yeah.
getting richer.
They're
Count
being poorer
surprise.
for just standing there.
Yes.
That'd be incredibly frustrating.
Well, they wouldn't know because they're never in a position to compare the worth of the two because you can't
True.
just can't use a florin because it's not, peasants.
Yeah.
You can't have a florin.
What happens if somebody gave you a florin? Were you required to give it to the church, all of it?
I don't
How do
suppose
you make
anyone did give you.
change?
Well, that's it. It makes running a business quite tricky because you have to pay your workers in piccioli and sell the stuff in florins.
Yeah.
So cheap cloth would be paid in piccioli and damask and silk would be paid for in florins. And that didn't just reflect the price of the cloth, but the sort of people who were doing the buying. It's a system that's very difficult to get our heads around these days. No, you're too common to have this coin. Just for posh people.
Yeah.
We keep coming across things where you just think, that's so different
Yes.
from how we think now.
You can't. It's not that you can't have it because you can't eventually earn it. You just can't have it.
No, you're the wrong type of person.
You can have the same amount of money in a
Yeah.
different coin, but not that coin.
Oh, why can't I have that coin? Yeah.
It's lighter to carry.
And apparently it's worth a lot more.
Yeah.
Anyway, on to the Medici proper. Our friend Piccolomini, the short-tenured Pope Pius III, said of Italy, quote, "In our change-loving Italy, where nothing stands firm and where no ancient dynasties exist, a servant can easily become a king," unquote. Which I think is quite rich coming from a pope
Yeah.
who had, by the nature of the job, taken quite a hike in status when he
Yes.
became pope. But it didn't occur to me, actually, the lack of ancient dynasties. Because there's so much usurpation
No kidding. And death. Through all
Death.
their wars.
and republic.
Yeah.
So you can't say, oh, my family came over during the Battle of Hastings, because it didn't work like that in Italy.
No.
And that was another reason, apart from the religious aspect, for distrusting usury, because socially, you don't know where you are. If a lowly person can raise themselves by setting themselves up in a money-making venture, then we're all going to hell in a handcart. I mean, all you need to set a bank up was money. You didn't need status, you didn't need nobility or prestige.
You didn't need a patron.
No,
Like, that takes you totally out of the system.
you don't need any skill.
Yeah.
And this was how some people saw the Medici, servants who had become kings.
Oh, I'm very sure that Lorenzo de' Medici would have loved that point of view.
Yeah, I was just about to say that I wouldn't have said that to Cosmo's face.
No. You might have survived if it was the original Lorenzo, but
Yeah.
Lorenzo the Magnificent, I don't know if he'd have that. We haven't talked about him, so I don't know how
He's an interesting character, yes.
he would have taken it.
Anyway, we'll come to him eventually. We're still on Giovanni de' Medici at the moment. But anyway, Cosimo de' Medici understood what Piccolomini was saying, because he said, quote, "A couple of lengths of red cloth and you have your nobleman," unquote. So, you could get away with
Yeah.
changes that seem quite trivial, but, make a big difference.
Yes.
And a banker could do this under the radar because they didn't make things or trade things. They just had money. The Medici Bank was founded in 1397 and collapsed in 1494, a date that should ring a few bells because that's when Charles VIII was marauding up and down So that's just short of 100 years, with many ups and downs in between. And it started, as we said, with Giovanni de' Medici, whose parting words to his children on his deathbed were, quote, "Keep out of the public eye," unquote. But as we know, not all his descendants heeded that advice.
No.
No. And despite what I'd always thought, the Medici weren't the first, nor the most innovative, nor the biggest bank. The Bardi and Peruzzi banks were much bigger.
We haven't talked about them. I've never even heard of them.
Well, they were the ones who were brought down by Edward III.
Ah, prior to our time.
Prior to our time. But always an English king and always Edward. How did the Medici Bank prevent themselves going under as previous banks had done? I hear you cry. All the branches of the other Italian banks had been under one umbrella. And this meant that if one branch had difficulties, for instance, say, in London...
All of them would.
Yeah, if the whole bank was liable. Giovanni de' Medici saw this and structured his bank differently. He made each branch a separate company, and a company that would be answerable to the Medici. So if London went down, Naples, Venice, Bruges, Avignon, Rome, Florence, Barcelona, they'd all be okay.
Okay.
The rule book for the Medici Bank, and there was one, set up about this time, shows how each sector in society was viewed. It says, don't lend more than 300 florins to a cardinal, or 200 to a courtier. Don't lend at all to Roman merchants, they were unreliable. Or to barons, because they don't respect the rules. Or to Germans, because their laws didn't back up the claims of the lender. So maybe that's why
Maximilian.
Yes, maybe that's why he had to rely on Fuga rather than the Medici. And this rule book was quite intrusive into the lives of their employees. Thou shalt not gamble, which seems a bit rich, given that that's what their job is.
Yes, but then they steal the money.
But thou shalt not keep a woman in the house. And that's the banking house. Because you can keep one in your own house if you're not an employee of the bank. But if you're sent off to a different town and you've all got to live together in, one big dormitory thing, you can't have a woman and your wives can't go. Giovanni de' Medici's son, Cosimo, was born in 1389, so going way back. He loved collecting books. And he didn't love money for money's sake, he said. He loved the intrigue and manipulation and excitement and power that banking gave him. He said, quote, even if money could be made by waving a wand, I would still be a banker, unquote.
That's messed up.
Well, I suppose it's exciting, isn't it? You might win, you might lose. Don't know. I mean, it's not my cup of tea.
No,
but...
I do not chase that kind of excitement.
No. But I can understand people who do. And I went on a bit of a tangent here because I thought, waving a wand seems very modern. So I looked it up. The first mention of wands is in a 13th century Latin grimoire, or spell book.
Really?
So there we go.
Nice.
Yeah, I thought it'd be much later.
So Harry Potter couldn't exist until then?
No. Cosimo was very ambitious, but he was also cautious, because he knew that your investment could go down as well as up, since the Medici Bank had gone down as well as up. But in the 1420s, when Cosimo was still a young man, it was on the up. Despite the rule book, Cosimo did keep a woman in his house, an enslaved girl that Cosimo called Maddalena, and with whom he had a child. But as we've heard, this was the golden age of bastards, so there was no great stigma in that, although the fact that she was enslaved, I might hope, have raised a few eyebrows. And in 1415 he married Contessina de' Bardi, and she brought prestige and military assistance, should they need it, to the Medici. Although the bank of her family had been the ones that were brought down by Edward III, so yeah. And they had two children, Piero the Gouty, which is a cruel name to give any child, I think, and Giovanni. And she also looked after little Carlo, Cosimo's illegitimate child, by the enslaved woman. So I don't know what happened to poor Maddalena. And not that that was her name, that was the name he gave her.
Oh.
Yeah.
Ew.
One thing we know about Italy is that it is constantly at war. So while we
Yes.
talk about the Medici, imagine a backdrop of war. And this is before the complications of the Italian War that we've looked at. So I'm not going to go into the whys and wherefores of it because it's before our time and not our business. Although it is easier to understand than the wars we're used to because apart from the Angevin French in Naples, it's all kept within the big five of Italy. Naples, Rome, Venice, Florence and Milan. So, and we were surprised about Julius describing himself as being Italian because we didn't come across anyone who mentioned Italy
Yeah.
as an entity before. It's made up of a distinct set of states. But Italians were aware of their shared heritage, and that was a problem, because they were constantly afraid that someone would come along who would be powerful enough to unite the entire peninsula. And no one wanted to risk that, because they might not turn out to be top state. So, what if you were in Florence and the great unifier was from Milan? It would be terrible. And so they all kept fighting to try and stop this from happening.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it's like some terrible dance marathon where everyone dances until they drop with exhaustion.
Or dies in this case.
Well, we know that, yeah, they're not particularly bloody affairs because they're fought by mercenary armies who, on the whole, don't want to be killed.
True, but that doesn't mean that people aren't dying as they rampage through the lands.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Machiavelli tells us that more people were killed in the very draconian tax-collecting methods than in the wars the taxes were being collected for.
Sorry, say that again?
More people were killed in the tax-collecting methods than in the wars the taxes were being collected for.
That's insane.
Isn't it?
So you're killing off the people you're supposed to be collecting the money from. That means they can never pay.
Yeah.
That's just dumb.
I'm not quite sure if he's saying more people were killed because so few people are actually killed in battle.
Doesn't matter. You don't kill
But-
anybody when you're collecting money. That just means you'll never get the money.
Yeah, and also it's not a very nice thing to do. I mean,
No. But I'm just thinking practically and logically. Come on.
yes. And mercenaries don't want to finish the war because that's their livelihood. They need to keep it going. So as Machiavelli was to complain of later, they deliberately leave the job half done so they can come back to it when they're short in money. So economically, these wars were disastrous for the city-states involved, but not so bad for moneylenders. The Medici, as we know, entered politics in a big way. In fact, Giovanni de' Medici was offered the role of Count of Monteverdi by Pope Martin in a thanks for the loan but don't tell anyone type way. But he turned it down because he did say, don't get in the limelight. He didn't particularly fancy that sort of thing. And also in Florence, the nobility weren't allowed to play politics, so if he'd become Count of anywhere, he wouldn't have been able to do anything. Giovanni de' Medici was making himself very popular since he'd come out against fighting the Milanese for Genoa. The ones who suffered most from war, mainly through having paid their taxes, or indeed having been killed trying to pay their taxes, were the peasants, artisans and small-scale traders. So they were fed up with war, and so anyone who said no to war was fined by them. And it is a republic, ostensibly. So it reached the point where they were being taxed so heavily they were starving. So that's probably what Machiavelli's getting at. The Florentine government had squeezed everything they could out of the poor, so now it was time to squeeze the rich. Now that seems bizarre as well, doesn't it? First get the poor until they're starving, and then think, oh, hang on, there's that other lot that actually have the money.
Yes.
Why don't we... Anyway, a tax was introduced based on ability to pay. So suddenly, as far as the rich were concerned, war wasn't fun anymore. Suddenly think, actually, I can see why these peasants don't like it.
Yep.
Cosimo, who followed his dad into politics, was a wily old bird. He had made sure that he was indispensable. He was on the Council of 10 of War, which was a council to decide how to react to this or that provocation, and there always was a provocation. Some of the other delegates were worried at how powerful Cosimo was and wanted to shove him off the Council of War, but they realised they wouldn't be able to since he was just too damn popular. he was very good, and Renzo the Magnificent was the same, very good at making himself popular, even when you think,
You're not a nice person.
surely everybody must hate you, but just good at it. I mean, we know of people now that you'd think, why are they so popular?
Yes.
So,
It actually says a lot about humanity that you don't have to be a kind person to be popular.
yeah,
That's sad.
yeah. In fact, it seems to go the other way.
Yes.
We came across the Florentine way of doing things when we did Machiavelli over on Patreon. They elected a new leader every 2 months.
Which is,
Thus,
again,
nothing
ridiculous.
got done.
Yes. That's too short of a term. I love the fact that you're electing people. That's great. Mm-hmm. But you might want to extend it until projects can be completed. Please.
Yeah, well, it drove Machiavelli mad and it drove us mad.
Yes.
And for these 2 months, the leader, the Gonfalonieri, and the 10 other men were required to live together and not go anywhere else. It's like the Big Brother house of 15th century Florentine bigwigs.
No wonder it was only 2 months. After 2 months, they would have killed each other.
Well, yeah, that, and they have to put their businesses on hold, really, because
Oh.
they're stuck in a house for 2 months. It's a bit like doing jury duty,
Yes.
but for 2 months. I mean, that surely couldn't be sustainable. Well, Cosimo was becoming richer and richer as Florence became poorer and poorer, and the political and economic system was unstable. So Cosimo hid some of his wealth in the monastery of San Marco, just in case his political rivals should decide to confiscate it, and just in case he should need to make a quick getaway, because in Florence, it's always worth having that in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
He was still making friends and influencing people. He advanced the money for Pope Martin's funeral and for Pope Eugenius's coronation, so this put him in the good books of the papacy. But the family who had dominated Florence for decades, the Albizzi, were worried because they could see their power slipping through their fingers. It's old money versus new money. Cosimo had lent the city of Florence 155,000 florins, which meant that the Medici Bank in Florence was running at a loss, but he must have thought it was worth the gamble. And it's paying off, because he had been patiently waiting, and at last the call came, "Come to the Signoria, we need you." So he presented himself to the Signoria, where he was promptly arrested. A character called Bernardo Guadagni was made Gonfalonieri. I've got enough practice of saying that word when we did Machiavelli. I think I can do it now. He was in the pocket of the Albizzi family since they'd paid his taxes for him, which allowed him to enter the Signoria, because you couldn't do it if you were in arrears with your taxes. So he was a puppet. So effectively the Albizzi were running the show, and they had seen a way of disposing of an irritation. So Cosimo was accused of treason. The Albizzi were determined to have him killed. In the past, the rich could be exiled, which would be pretty much the end of them, because they'd have to leave their palaces and their possessions and their good name. But these new money men, if they're sent into exile, they just start up a business somewhere else with money they've got squirreled away in their own bank. So they figured execution was the only way.
Oh, goodness.
The treason came from an accusation that Cosimo had endeavoured to raise himself above others. And this is a republic. No one is above anybody else. I mean, obviously that's rubbish. But...
Yeah. Sometimes I get very frustrated.
But that's the idea.
Do you see what you're doing? Did you logically think this through? I'm sure you thought you did.
That's still the idea behind a democracy, isn't it? And yet it's still not true. He was definitely ambitious. So that may well have been the case. I'm sure he did want to raise himself above others. But 2 of his supporters had claimed that he was planning an armed insurrection. They were on the rack and would have said anything, but, there we go. Luckily, as we've said, Cosimo had the Pope literally in his debt, and several other powerful people like the Marquis of Ferrara needed Cosimo if they wanted to keep their heads above water. And Cosimo's brother Lorenzo raised an army on behalf of Cosimo. So if the Albizzi had hoped to arrest him, behead him and then go quietly about their business, that was not going to happen. And it's one of these ironic things that I don't think Cosimo had planned an armed insurrection before he was arrested, but now there is one.
Oh, yay! What the heck?
Even in his cell, Cosimo was writing cheques, including one for the Gonfaloniere, Bernardo Guadagni, for a lot more than the Albizzi had given him.
Oh.
So Guadagni, who was meant to be Albizzi's puppet, elected to stay at home on the day that Cosimo was to be charged, claiming to be ill.
Oh, so he doesn't actually switch sides. That was a lame investment.
No, he just hid under the duvet. So I'm not well. Yeah, that phone call you make into work. Hello, I'm not at all well. Yes, and then put the phone down. Right, that's that done. I'm self-employed, so I don't have to do that. Cosimo's punishment was commuted to exile. He was to go to Padua, and his brother Lorenzo, not the Magnificent, was to go to Venice. And from their exiles, Cosimo and Lorenzo ran the bank, so not much changed. And they used their money to ingratiate themselves, as they always had done. And then the pendulum swung in the Medici favour. Pope Eugenius was forced to flee to Florence. So now, more than ever, he needed his banker to finance his return to Rome. The Albizzi were caught trying to rig an election, and Cosimo was back, and the Albizzi were exiled, because he now held the power. And as we've said, Cosimo was not a nice man. Even if we don't believe all the accusations against him, some of which were trumped up by his enemies. From what we can gather, he was cruel, tyrannical, vengeful, and ran his domain on dictatorial terms. And he'd impregnated an enslaved woman, so no, he's not a nice man. Most shocking for the time was that he ran Florentine foreign policy to suit his own business interests. He swapped their allegiance from Venice to Milan, and it wasn't a coincidence that Francesco Sforza of Milan was a client of the Medici Bank. In fact, he came to owe them 190,000 florins, which is an astronomical figure that he had no hope of repaying.
Yeah.
Showing that the Medici saw it as a good investment just to keep Milan from attacking them.
Wow.
And Sforza felt some obligation to help Florence attack Lucca. And this all links to our Patreon episode on Louis XI, since he sided with the Sforza and Medici Bank. And Cosimo used his links with the Pope to threaten late payers with excommunication, which is an unbelievable state of affairs for a bank.
Yes.
Cosimo did have his good side. He created the Good Men of San Martino, whose role it was to ask for donations which were then spent on what was called the shamed poor, those poor people who were too ashamed of their poverty to ask for help.
Oh. Okay.
You didn't point at them and say, "You're poor," before giving them the money.
It's kind of where I thought that was going.
Yeah. Loser. But the help was done anonymously, both the giver and the receiver. But we know from Cosimo's ledgers they come under the heading of God's account. So, again, it's like the art and architecture. Cosimo was making sure that God saw how good he was and ignoring the whole usury thing. And the impregnating enslaved women things.
Ugh.
He asked Pope Eugenius what he should do to ensure his salvation while still enjoying the trappings of wealth. And the Pope's reply, spend 10,000 florins restoring the monastery of San Marco. So it's not surprising these people thought they could get away with it. The Pope saying, yeah, that won't be a sin if you just fork out the money. But salvation came from donating the money by stealth, not making a song and dance about it. But, making sure people did find out that he'd done it by stealth. So Cosimo paid for the renovation, but the monastery was to be named San Marco and San Damiano, which is the name of Cosimo's twin brother who died when they were born. So he's sort of laying claim to the monastery in quite a subtle way.
And isn't San Saint, so he's calling his brother a saint? just
Well,
seems a bit.
I don't think he's saying that his brother's a saint. I think he's saying the saint that has the same name as his brother, they name it after him. Yeah, they're accusing him of wanting to be a prince. They're not accusing him of wanting to be a saint. Cosimo used his money for another aspect of religion, that of bringing together the Eastern and Western Church. Because there was to be a conference in Ferrara, but as so often happened in Italy, plague hit Ferrara, so Cosimo grabbed the opportunity to say, come to Florence, no plague here at the moment. So the Medici paid for everything, and the conference carried on in Florence. And the subject up for discussion was, did the Holy Spirit come from God, the Eastern Church maintained, or from God and Jesus, as the Western Church stated?
Really?
And the Eastern Church seems to have capitulated, which is quite extraordinary since this has been a bone of contention with the Eastern Church for centuries.
Yes.
And yet they said, yeah, okay, you're probably right. But a lot of kudos for this change of heart went to Cosimo. Well done, you have united the two churches.
Did he give them money to do it?
Oh, no. No. Can't have done.
I will give you a lot of money if you just say, okay.
Yeah, say okay, and then said Cosimo made it happen.
Yes, yes. He is a saint.
Yes, like his brother. However, when the representatives from the Eastern Church got home, they were faced with, you've done what?
Yes.
The unification didn't last. And if all this sounds familiar, you might have been listening to Totalis Rankium's episode on John the Eighth, because we are now running concurrently with Totalis Rankium. So I'll put a link on our thing so you can see both sides of the story. But when you saw John the Eighth heading off to try and sort out the two churches, they were going to go meet Cosimo de' Medici.
That's cool.
It is, isn't it? I love connections.
Me too.
Florence was a republic, at least in name, as we've seen, although no one was really fooled. No. So how did Cosimo manage to accumulate so much power since there wasn't supposed to be an out-and-out leader? They were only meant to last 2 months and then pass it on to someone else. Someone whose name was picked at random from a leather bag.
Really? See, his name was picked at random from a leather bag because he was the only name in the leather bag, people.
He's not the only name, but the only names in it are his own people.
Yes.
Yeah. So simple, very simple bit of election
repeated
fraud.
over and over and over again, so he guarantees he gets one of them.
And these people didn't just do 2 months, they got it extended to a year. They probably said much as we did. Look, we can't do things in 2 months.
Yes.
Let us have a year.
Yes.
And then when the year was over, we'll have another. It's a bit like Putin. We'll have another year and another year.
We're not finished yet.
I think we can probably add intimidation to fraud there. Florentine republicanism was great in theory, but when there was a war, which there usually was, do we really want to be faffing around electing people every 2 months? And to give Cosimo his due, it's not a stupid thing to suggest.
No.
People got annoyed. There were only 10 names in the bag rather than 100 or so there should have been. So Cosimo said, okay, fine. He was a great one for saying, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's fine. I can sort it out. Until you blinked then, I thought you'd frozen.
No, thinking it through. Trying to stay calm. What's wrong with you people?
So Cosimo put 100 names into the bag. But all but the original 10 would be ineligible in some way.
Oh.
They hadn't paid their taxes, they weren't resident in Florence.
Oh, you sneaky.
Someone else in their family had had the post 2 years ago. It was all done scrupulously legally. And yet Cosimo's people always got the job. Over the next couple of decades, the Florentine electoral system was tweaked by the Medici and their hangers-on to the point when people would rise up and complain that they were taking all the positions for themselves. And then Cosimo would graciously back down. I was only doing it for the good of Florence, but if you don't want me to, that's fine.
I'll stop paying for this and this and this to be built.
Yes.
Oh, look, everything's stalled.
Oh, everything's falling down.
Oh, no.
That's a pity.
Yeah, you have no water. Mm.
And the Venetians are coming. Oh, well. But then pretty soon the tweakage would start again. It's like a child that stops doing something because you're looking at them, and then when they think you're not looking at them,
They start it again.
Carry on.
Yes.
Some of Cosimo's men got impatient and said, enough of this. Why don't we just take power? Use military.
Be a king.
We've got gun. Yeah. But Cosimo's much more wily than that. If they took power by force, then someone else could come and take power from them.
Okay.
Better to take it gently, compromise when you have to, try and keep everyone happy, and if they did it subtly, they'd probably be able to hang on to power for longer.
How do you gently take power?
Well, that's what he's doing at the moment.
Oh, I
He's
guess so.
sneakily changing things and then saying, oh, sorry, I had no idea. Thank you for bringing it to my
I
attention.
can't believe I did that.
Yes. Sorry, I was tired and emotional, as they always say. And he was a canny operator. It was said of him, quote, and whenever he wished to achieve anything, to avoid envy, he gave the impression as far as possible that it was they who had suggested the thing and not he, unquote.
Oh, yes. Hey, when we go into this meeting, you're going to say this, and I'm going to go, really?
Well, I felt it was more subtle than that. I thought he was actually convincing themselves that they had thought it. But maybe it was just, yes, you do as you're damn well told. Machiavelli said of him, quote, he mixed power with grace, he covered it over with decency, unquote. And it covers it over bit sounds a bit suspect, as if he had something to cover over, which obviously he did. When Visconti died, he didn't bequeath Milan to his son-in-law, Francesco Sforza, but to Alfonso of Aragon, King of Naples. And the Milanese said, well, Naples is bloody miles away, that's ridiculous. And they formed a republic. And the Neapolitan army marched on Naples saying, don't you dare, you are ours. And we were given you. So Venice marched on Milan, since if there was a war going on, Venice liked to see if they could capitalise on it in some way. Francesco Sforza fought off the Neapolitans and the Venetians, and then when he was victorious, he told Milan, right, you owe me now, and he took over. And Cosimo was the first to recognise Francesco Sforza.
As a threat?
No.
Really?
No. Well, and this is despite the fact the Milanese hate him and feel he has no right to be there. But he had borrowed money from the Medici bank, and Cosimo wasn't going to get the money back if Sforza failed. So it was obvious where the power lay, because when foreign ambassadors came to Florence, they no longer came to the Palazzo della Signoria, they went straight to Cosimo's palace. He can't really deny that he's trying to get above everybody. I mean, for a start, he's got a palace. I haven't got a palace.
And it's literally more stories than everybody else.
Yes. Well, Cosimo was a lucky man, or he created his own luck, I'm not sure. But when he was losing the Florentine people's trust, the Venetians chose that time to threaten to attack. And no one liked the Venetians, so they all got behind Cosimo.
Quickly.
And then just as the war began to go badly for Florence, Sultan Mehmet captured Constantinople.
Thank you.
And Rome, Milan, Venice, Naples and Florence all signed the Peace of Lodi. And they all got down to thinking about fighting the infidel.
Yeah, we'll think about it. Only.
Yes. So he was extraordinarily lucky how things just seemed to come to him naturally. But his luck was about to run out. Peace meant there was time to look at how Florence was run. And it didn't look good. Florence was skint. War, plague, and then an earthquake. The people were starving. And the council insisted that elections should actually be fair and not just seem to be fair.
Wait, the council that he's paid for?
They seem to have so many councils. Maybe it's a different council. It's not the Signoria. It's probably... Because then they... Because once this was done, the new Signoria announced that they were taxing the rich. So this was not looking good for Cosimo's cronies, most of whom were rich. So they decided to call a parliament, and I couldn't work out where a parliament fitted into all these complex structure of councils that they've got. But this parliament, helped by the fact that Francesco Sforza's men were guarding each door of the chamber, voted for a wholly illegal system whereby a small number of names would be put into the electoral bag and they would all be Medici names.
This is so sad and annoying.
If you didn't like the idea, the only option was to rise up and fight it. But no, because Francesco Sforza's men were guarding the doors. He's probably paid off that loan just by
When are we getting
there.
to the fall?
Not yet. But Cosimo wasn't pleased. This wasn't how he wanted to do it. He was for more subtlety. But he was old and beset by the Medici disease of gout.
Oh yeah, syphilis isn't there yet.
No. His sons were already badly affected by it. All three of them had to be carried around Florence in litters. And in fact, one of his sons, Giovanni, predeceased his father from gout. But Cosimo died on August the 1st, 1464, aged 74. So as a gouty old man, he didn't do too badly.
Wow.
Piero, the gouty, didn't have his father's charisma
Okay.
or his following. And it was a bad time for banking. And this isn't Piero the Unfortunate. He comes into the story later. Piero the Gouty. What a name, especially given that they're all gouty. Cosimo had relied on consensus, but now he was no longer around. The consensus had broken down. But Piero was almost certainly set up by his erstwhile friend but covert enemy, Negroni. Piero discovered that Cosimo had left him a bank with no money but a lot of debtors. Negroni told Piero, "You know what you should do? You should call in all those debts. That's what you should do." So Piero did just that.
All of
the
them.
debts, all at once. Yeah, that would sort out their cash flow problem. But with one decision, Piero had made himself the most unpopular man in Florence. Several companies failed. People were leaving the Medici Bank and putting their business in the hands of other banks in droves. Francesco Sforza then died, and his widow and children begged Florence for a loan of 60,000 florins to protect their position in Milan. But all the Florentine banks said no. Why would they want to finance what was effectively the Medici army? Piero's business partner was Pier Francesco de' Medici, but for some reason he undermined Piero at every opportunity. Maybe because he was married into a rival banking family.
Ah. Yes, that makes sense.
And also, Piero was so incapacitated with gout that sometimes the only thing he could move was his tongue.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not realize. I thought gout was only in the feet. Oh, we're going to have to do
Apparently
an
not.
episode on gout. Because I don't know anything about gout. Yeah.
Meanwhile, all the political machinations intended to ensure that the Medici would be ruling Florence by the back door were overturned, and Medici had lost their hold on power. The problem with being new money is that all the culture and the art in the world can't buy you old money credibility. Also, it doesn't give you the automatic right of succession that being part of the nobility does. So Piero was sort of, I was about to say he was flailing. I mean, he would be flailing if he could move something more than his tongue.
Oh, gosh.
So an assassination attempt on Piero was either exceptionally well timed for him or entirely made up by him.
Ah, look at how popular I now am. Because, look, somebody tried to kill me.
It never does someone up for election any harm to be the target of an assassination attempt, does it?
No.
No. Maybe the sword just nicked his ear.
Yeah. It's the same with monarchy and stuff. They become more popular after an assassination attempt.
I do.
Why? Why do you like them more if somebody tries to assassinate them? They could be Hitler.
You can't be that popular if someone's tried to kill you.
Yeah.
No, I don't know, but it still works. He was able to call on the Milanese army to protect him and to put guards on the gates of Florence, which would only allow people in who are friendly to the Medici. It really goes up and down, doesn't it? Piero's rivals didn't react fast enough because they were worried that they called upon the plebs to rise up against the Medici. They might get a taste for ousting wealthy people and ransack their palaces, so they didn't react as quickly as they should have done. And this was all going on just one day before the election of a new signoria, and the outcome of which was overwhelmingly pro-Medici.
Yeah, of course it was.
Yes. The presence of the Milanese military must have helped. So, Piero had the signoria, and he had the city filled with his own mercenaries. Another parliament was called, and 2,000 troops were there just milling around.
Milanese around. Sorry.
And Piero's son Lorenzo was with him on horseback, looking, dare we say,
Like a prince.
magnificent.
Ooh, magnificent. Right.
That Lorenzo.
That's Lorenzo. Lorenzo the Kind.
The Parliament brought back the dodgy electoral weighting in favour of the Medici, and the police commission were now in Medici's hands, leading to several Medici rivals fleeing the city before they were pushed.
Whore.
This has gone far beyond anything seen in Cosimo's day, so not bad for someone who can only move his tongue, really.
Yeah.
In the early 1450s, the Medici Bank inexplicably changed its policy that it prevented the bank from going bankrupt when all around them were going under. Now each branch was owned directly by a manager, rather than having a share in the entire holding. And there was a general manager of the bank as a whole, Francesco Sassetti, between 1458 and 1490. But he only had shares in the Avignon and Geneva branches. So what was it to him if the rest of the bank ran at a loss, as long as these two branches were making him extra rich?
Right.
So this change of policy
Really doesn't make you a solidified unit.
No.
You're now worried about only one part of it to the detriment of all of it. Yeah, that doesn't work. That really doesn't work.
No, it was a foolish thing to do. Also, as the managers of the branches usually had a familial collection to the Medici, this meant that if there were to be checks and balances, if, for instance, their branch was going to be audited and there had been some dodgy dealing or incompetence,
They just hide it.
they'd kick up a fuss and say, I'm a member of your family. Don't you trust
Yeah,
me?
why aren't you? Oh.
And they usually got away with it. In 1420, there had been 72 banks in Florence. By 1470, there were just 33. And the reason for the decline were bad debts from the likes of Edward IV and Charles the Bold, and falling trade, for which we're yet to find an adequate explanation. I'm not quite sure why that is. I got the impression it was to do with the next generation as well. You have your first money-making generation, and then the second money-spending generation.
Why is that? Why does the son usually do worse than the father? Like, don't they?
Because he's been spoilt.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you've made the business, if you brought it up from nothing, it's your baby.
Yes.
But no, the next generation don't have that feeding. The first quote I found from Lorenzo the Magnificent was when he cheerfully stated, quote, "I know nothing about such matters," unquote. And he was talking about banking.
Oh,
It doesn't bode well.
God.
A quick look at how Edward IV defaulted, because we've mentioned a few times that he has, or did. So, Piero de' Medici had to ensure the import of raw wool into Florence to avoid unemployment and unrest, since, remember, he's not just a banker, he's running the place. The Medici regime wasn't so firmly rooted that they could necessarily ride that storm. And it had to be raw wool so the Florentines could do the finishing. And Edward IV said, look, I'm a bit strapped for cash at the moment. Can I pay for part of it in cloth? And the Medici representative in Rome, Giovanni Tornabuoni, refused. Piero had told him, under no circumstances are you to accept English finished cloth, or you'll put our cloth workers out of business. But then Tornabuoni panicked. What if we don't get paid at all? He thought. So he hot-footed it to England on his own initiative and picked up a load of cloth and took it to Bruges to pay the debt incurred by Charles the Bold. They then sent the cloth to Florence as part of their debt to the Florentines, and it was the last thing the Florence wanted. But Tornabuoni was family. So what could they do? They were able to recoup some of their losses when they sold Florentine silk back to Edward IV to be used as part of the celebrations of the marriage of Margaret of York and Charles the Bold. Because everything seems to come back to that wedding, doesn't it?
Yes. It was important.
However, to pay for this silk, Edward took out another loan with the Milanese branch of the Medici Bank. But that would be fine, because Edward was king. And as long as someone's king, you can be sure they'll find the money to pay you back.
Oh, sure.
But then Edward fled the country and Henry VI was back. and the Medici loan just disappeared down the drain. And on top of that, the Medici had lent money to other English nobles, and they all now lay dead on the battlefields of Barnet and Tewkesbury.
Right.
So, in 1472, the Medici cut their losses and closed the London branch of the bank. And Edward then promptly gave the man who had run the branch English citizenship, a rich wife, and land in Buckinghamshire in an "I can't believe we just got away with that" type way.
Yeah.
He never had to pay them back.
Huh.
In 1469, Piero de' Medici died. And we can read what happens next from Lorenzo's memoirs.
Ooh, I love memoirs. They're not always accurate, but they give you something.
They're very rarely accurate. You'd think they should be, because, if anyone's there, you're going to be, but no. Quote, "Though I, Lorenzo, was very young, being 20 years of age, the principal men of the city and of the regime came to us in our house to mourn our loss and encouraged me to take charge of the city and the regime as my grandfather and father had done. The which, being contrary to my age and involving great responsibilities and perils, I accepted with reluctance, and only to preserve our friends and possessions. For in Florence, things can go badly for the rich if they don't run the state," unquote. So, didn't want it.
But I
But
had
if
to
you
do
twist my arm, yeah. Yeah, if he was that reluctant, why had he already written to Galeazzo Sforza in Milan to ask for military aid to guarantee his succession? No, Lorenzo. I think you do protest too much. Brief description of Lorenzo the Magnificent. Flat nose, lumpy forehead, protruding bottom lip, bushy eyebrows from a very early age. I don't know how early.
No, I'm looking.
No sense of smell.
No sense of smell.
No. A high-pitched, screechy voice, and yet strangely attractive to women.
Well, that's the money.
Well, I was going to say it might be a case of what attracted you to the millionaire Lorenzo de' Medici.
His pictures don't look quite so bad.
No, well, they wouldn't, would they?
No. Those are photoshopped.
We saw a picture of Sigismund of Tyrol's Scottish wife that didn't pull any punches, didn't we?
I was like, jeez.
I presume it's not the one that was sent to him. Anyway. In 1469, Lorenzo married Clarice. Despite stooping a little and having no breast to speak of, Clarice was a member of one of the great families of Rome. So the Medici were climbing the social ladder, not just money, but prestige. Sadly for Clarice, Lorenzo's heart belonged to a previous girlfriend, Lucrezia, also now married, and he wrote love poetry to Lucrezia, not to Clarice.
Oh.
And in fact, the following year, Lorenzo and Clarice had a little girl, and she was given the name Lucrezia. Not sure what Lucrezia thought of that. If we're looking for reasons for the decline of the bank, we can look at Lorenzo's personality and interests. Lorenzo does very well out of history because his interests are ones that interest us now. Philosophy, literature, art, poetry, all high-minded stuff. Compared to which, banking seemed just a little bit tacky and sordid.
Yeah, although I must say I'm not into poetry. Sorry.
I'm not. And I find philosophy quite hard going. However, the banking part is his job. But he was to find that the crucial part of this was something we know well. Cue Rob's jingle.
The alum trade. The alum trade. The alum trade. The alum trade.
Oh, the alum trade.
He was first sent to negotiate terms for alum when he was just 17.
70.
If you know what I mean. But this trip was hijacked by events since Francesco Sforza died, and Lorenzo's role was then changed to trying to convince the Pope that Francesco's son Galeazzo Maria should succeed his father. And we didn't like Galeazzo Maria because he stuffed a whole hair down the throat of a poacher and choked him.
Yes.
This was vital to the Medici, not the hair bit. I mean, it's vital that Galeazzo should get in. to the Medici since the Sforzas were their main ally. Lorenzo then had to leg it down to Naples to check that King Ferrante had no plans on that score. However, when he wasn't schmoozing on behalf of the Sforzas, he was obtaining the monopoly over all the sales of alum throughout the entirety of Christendom.
Oh, wow. Except for the illegal trade.
Well, that's not Christendom.
Well, Henry VII.
So
we're
that's-
before Henry VII. Okay, never mind.
Well, no, I'm thinking about that's from the Ottoman Empire, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And this worked well, since the Pope had the alum and the Medici had the contacts. These transactions were backed by threat of excommunication.
Of course they were. Which isn't really a threat. Nobody seems to care.
No, I know. But it was also a curious act on the part of the Pope, since the Church held much the same view on monopolies as it did about usury. They saw it as stealing from the common weal. But how was the Church to get around the blatant breach of its own monopoly laws? Well, there's always a way. There's bad monopoly and good monopoly. This wasn't bad monopoly, this was the virtuous monopoly, since the money raised would go to fighting the infidel.
Okay, I can see how they could argue that.
Yes, don't bother to try and unravel it, just accept that this is what they said.
Okay.
The Medici were convinced the alum trade would be the end of all their problems. No more having to rely on dodgy people like Edward IV and Charles the Bold. Just dodgy people like the Pope. But we've already done an episode on the alum trade. We know what happened. Even with a threat of excommunication, there were some really very naughty people who preferred to go their own way and not pay the exorbitant prices demanded by the Pope.
Gee, I wonder why.
Strangely, the Medici agreed to pay the Pope his cut on the alum before it was sold and shipped. And they did this in return for having the monopoly, so maybe it's not so strange. And it must have seemed like a good deal. It was backed by excommunication. No one would go against the Pope's demands. But they did. And with alum coming from both the papal and Turkish sources, there was a glut in the market. Prices fell, shipping and warehouse costs were rising. And unbelievably, the Medici were losing money on the alum trade.
Really?
What should have been the most lucrative trade going.
Wow.
Well, that's because Lorenzo would rather write poetry than keep his eye on the ball, I think.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Lorenzo was finding it hard to hold on to power. He'd set up the Signoria in his favour, but then gradually people would vote in such a way that it gave them more freedom and democracy. I mean, the nerve of these people.
How dare they? What were they thinking?
Lorenzo found that he'd have to attend the elections in person if people weren't to vote against him.
Wow.
And I don't think it's necessarily used overtly heavy-handed tactics. I think he was similar to his grandfather, Cosimo. Press the flesh, smile, try and make people like you,
charm.
and maybe they'll feel too guilty to vote against you. Well, then he had a brainwave. Get the new incumbents of the post to be voted in by the old incumbents. Then there won't be that irritating veering off into a search for freedom nonsense.
Okay.
Problem solved. And obviously the previous officials, who were Medici sympathisers, would vote in more Medici sympathisers. And this seems quite a draconian approach to ruling, but it was nothing compared to what happened next. Around this time, alum was found in the small town of Volterra. And this was great news because Volterra paid tribute to Florence, although it had its own government. Lorenzo set about subsuming this alum mine into the Medici's alum monopoly. But the people of Volterra said, no, this is our alum. And they took back the mine.
This is ours. Sounds like children.
Yes.
No, this is mine.
Get your own alum. Strangely, the Volterrans, who do sound like something out of Star Trek, don't
Yes.
they, asked Lorenzo to arbitrate between them and the alum consortium, which is odd given that the consortium was run by the Medici.
Oh, now we're with the
And
Ferengi.
Well, did the Volterrans really expect an unbiased decision?
Did they?
Well, Lorenzo thought long and hard, and then decided that all things considered, maybe the Medici should have it. Perhaps.
Oh.
And the Voltairians reacted overreacted, some might say, and killed 2 of Lorenzo's supporters and declared themselves independent from Florence. This was an insult Lorenzo felt he couldn't ignore, and he sent a mercenary army to besiege Volterra.
You had to have known that was coming. You had to have known that was coming.
Yeah.
Or was this one of those kill? What did I do?
Well, it is a bit, because they surrendered on condition that their lives and property would be spared, which might have been a little bit naive, I think.
Yes.
The mercenaries ransacked, raped and murdered their way through the town. And yes, as you said, Lorenzo, to his credit, was horrified by what had happened.
Of course he...
He offered Voltaire a compensation of 2,000 florins, a fifth of what he'd spent on his wedding.
Oh, my gosh.
And they must have thought of that at Volterra. How much did that wedding cost?
Yeah, and none of them were the women who got raped. They would never get anything.
No. Nope. So he may have claimed to be shocked, but at least now he had his blood-stained mitts on the Volterra alum mine. But on closer inspection, it turned out there wasn't very much alum after all, and what there was pretty ropey, so the mine was shut down.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
The historian, Guicciardini, said, I like Guicciardini, he always seems to come out with something sensible, said that this had all come about because of Lorenzo's suspicion of everyone and his conviction that they intended to bring him down. I should imagine they did intend to bring him down. I mean, that was the situation there. When Pope Sixtus, whom Lorenzo had got on with previously, tried to get back the Città di Castello, which was in papal states and was ruled by someone the Pope saw as a usurper, Lorenzo told the Pope in no uncertain terms to lay off his friend. It's my friend who owns Città di Castello. You can't have it. Well, the popes don't like that. He sent troops, but not enough to help his friend, but certainly enough to antagonise the Pope. And it created a rift between the papacy and the Medici. Galeazzo Maria Sforza of Milan was murdered, and that was a pity, not because he was a terribly nice man, but because he owed the Medici a fortune. So not much chance of seeing that money again. And Charles the Bold was killed at the Battle of Nancy and had his face eaten up by wolves, so more financial losses. He doesn't seem to be as lucky as Cosimo was. He seems to be quite unlucky. And then there was an incident we've seen before, at least those of us on Patreon. The Pope wanted the city of Imola for his nephew Girolamo Riario, sleazy husband number 1 of Caterina Sforza. Yeah. The Pope wanted to borrow money from the Medici, but they said, no, we want Imola. It's close to Florence, it's ours. Not only did Lorenzo not lend the Pope the money, but he told all Florentine bankers not to do so either.
Oh, right.
But the Pazzi family not only lent Sixtus the money, but told him of Lorenzo's ban. Lorenzo told us not to do it, Your Holiness, but we've done it anyway. He told us not to.
But I wonder, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know if I've said it before. Probably did. I wonder if the term patsy comes from this family.
No, I don't think so. I think patsy means mad people. Oh. I don't know why they were called the mad people. I mean, this is their name, but you've got to get your name from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Lorenzo retaliated by excluding the Pazzi from politics, and this very quickly spiralled out of control, leading to an attempt on Lorenzo's life and the murder of his brother in the Pazzi conspiracy. Again, see Patreon. And this further spiralled out of control, dragging in the Papal States, Naples, and several others. And all the Medici assets in Rome and Naples were frozen. So things were getting desperate for Lorenzo. He had custody over the finances of 2 of his cousins, kept in 13 leather bags. The money is kept in 13 leather bags. The cousins aren't kept in 13 leather bags. That would be... I don't even want to think about the logistics of that. On May the 1st, 1478, Lorenzo borrowed 20,000 florins out of one of these leather bags. 2 days later, he borrowed another 5,000.
Oh, no.
By the end of September, he'd borrowed the lot. Over the next few years, he was to borrow 75,000 florins from the Florentine state. Highly illegal. he shut down the Milan and Bruges branches of the bank since they weren't able to give him any money. If they didn't have enough to give him, they can't have been doing a very good job, was his reasoning. There was plague. 2 mercenary armies Florence had hired were fighting each other, and Florence still had to pay them. The whole city was under a penance of excommunication following the Pazzi conspiracy. It was grim. It was really grim in Florence at that time. The Medici were hiding behind a facade of culture, artistic commissions, luxury, anything to hide how skint they were.
Goodness.
Fortunately for Lorenzo and his battle with the Pope, the Turks invaded Otranto, and Lorenzo contributed to the Get the Turks Out fund, and all was forgiven, sort of. Although the Pope was still none too keen to pay his debts to the Medici Bank. Some histories show Lorenzo as an enlightened ruler. He wrote poetry, for goodness sake. He wasn't. He was a tyrant. He claimed to come in peace, yet he was constantly enlarging the Florentine borders. He campaigned for free choice in marriage, yet he was constantly forcing spouses together if it was expedient for Lorenzo.
Oh.
He constantly complained how irksome power was while desperately clinging on to it. He was ruthless, even when a crowd called out for mercy for someone about to be hanged. He hanged him anyway. So seeing it from this angle, was the Pazzi conspiracy a valid attempt to rid their city of a tyrant?
Sounds like yes.
I'm not sure. I think there were faults on both sides, probably. The Pazzi were miffed that they weren't getting money and power they felt they were entitled to. Miffed. I like the word miffed. Yes.
Miffed is a little...
It's a wonderful understatement.
Yes.
They were a tad miffed. Lorenzo had become so paranoid that he had his own foreign ambassadors spied on. When the manager of the Bruges Bank, before it was shut down, made a suggestion that there should be a subsidiary branch dealing with the very few aspects of trade that were still making money, and then it turned out he'd bought shares, or the 15th century equivalent, in this new subsidiary, Lorenzo said, quote, "He took advantage of my inexperience," unquote.
Oh, what a lie. What a lie.
He wasn't a boy. He'd been brought up in a banking family. He'd been running the bank himself for several years. Who is he trying to kid with? That bigger boy's tricked him out of his dinner money routine. I quite liked him when we were doing Pico della Mirandola.
Not so much now.
I went off him doing this. The next generation of the Medicis were even more arrogant and incompetent than the last lot. But whereas before Cosimo and Piero had been wary of telling people off if they were family, under Lorenzo, if they weren't managing well enough, he would invite them back to Florence for a little chat about their performance and then have them thrown into jail.
I knew he was going to do something more. That chat could not be enough.
No. Cosimo would have had the chat. But if that. Mm-hmm. Up to now, no one could take Lorenzo to court because he was the state. We've come across things the way you can't be taken to court if you happen to be in power. Yes. But his star was waning, and he became the defendant in several court cases, including his 2 cousins whose 13 leather bags of money he had pilfered. The Medici Palazzo had to be sold to cover the cost, and Lorenzo was now his own bank's main debtor.
Oh! Can you do that?
Which is weird. I'm not sure.
Huh.
Well, unless he was borrowing from the bank all the time, like he borrowed from everybody else.
Maybe, but...
Just, hand in the till.
If you own it, are you borrowing it? Or are you just taking it? This is my salary.
Well, it's the Medici Bank. It's not the Lorenzo de Medici Bank, I suppose.
Maybe. Or because it's a separate entity, it has to be put in as a borrow. I don't know.
Yeah. If they're all separate branches.
Yeah.
Well, Lorenzo started plying the Pope with gifts until the pontiff crumbled and said, yes, fine. His 13-year-old son, Giovanni de Lorenzo de' Medici, could become a cardinal.
Oh, my goodness.
And we were wondering how Pope Leo X became Pope without ever being a priest. That was the reason. He became a cardinal when he was only 13.
Oh, my. Wow.
But at least he could now start contributing to the Medici coffers with his benefices.
Was that the actual reason why they made him a cardinal? It wasn't the fact that he wanted him to have power. He wanted the money coming from the cardinalship?
Both, I think. But it didn't happen because Giovanni was very soon in debt to the bank for 7,000 florins. Never enough with these people.
I can sort of understand the never enough because there's never enough craft supplies in the world. I need a bigger house for my craft supplies.
I'm a bit like that with plants. I have to make sure my phone is well away from me if I watch Gardener's World, because I think, oh, that's nice, and start going to a well-known online store. I think, no room. However, as bad as the Medici Bank was looking, at least they were still there, because most of the other Florentine banks had gone under. Lorenzo was now riddled with gout. His friend, Pico della Mirandola, again, Patreon, suggested he get the priest and mystic Savonarola to come to Florence. And this would prove to be a bit of a mistake. Savonarola was preaching that the times they were a-changing, and one of the things that should change was the Medici regime. He said that Lorenzo was a tyrant and had riddled the state with corruption. Both true. Quote, "The real preacher cannot flatter a prince, only attack his vices," unquote. So obviously not a man to be bought off. Lorenzo was close to death. He was still writing poems and now hymns, and he was picking over his love poems to Lucretia to create an imaginary autobiography. On the last day of his life, Lorenzo did call for Savonarola, and we don't know what he said, but honestly, Savonarola would be my choice to talk to at my last day on earth. He's going to turn you off. Lorenzo died on the 8th of April, 1492. Even Lorenzo didn't have much of an opinion of his son Piero the Unfortunate. But when you see the legacy his father had left him, you can see why he was so unfortunate. I mean, he wasn't up to the job. I don't think anyone denies that, but his dad has left him a horrendous... Yes. The bank's in a horrendous state.
Yes.
And presumably he's still got to pay off the borrowings that Lorenzo has done.
Yeah.
This seems a bit odd, but Guicciardini says of him, quote, "The goodwill on the part of the people and princes was so great that had Piero had even an ounce of wit or prudence, he could not have fallen," unquote. And you think, why is the goodwill so great? It shouldn't be.
No.
It's a disaster.
Yeah.
And obviously Guicciardini wouldn't have made that comment if Piero hadn't fallen. Piero did the time-honoured Italian ploy. When the going gets tough, remind the French of their claim to Naples.
Oh, no, don't do that. Don't.
Yes, it's time to activate Plan B. He then antagonised the Sforzas by appearing to side with Naples. Sforza called in Charles VIII of France, and the rest is known only too well to us. Piero met up with Charles to negotiate terms, and agreed to all Charles's demands, much to the horror of the Signoria. And when Piero arrived back in Florence, the gates of the Signoria were locked. Piero leapt on his horse and rode out of town. Everything the Medici had accumulated was ransacked, which I think is fair enough. I mean, they'd taken it from everybody else, hadn't they? Share it about a bit. I mean, the population's intermittently starving. The family later came back to Florence. In the 1520s, they were made dukes, but that was the end of the Medici Bank. Although, as we've seen, it had been on the ventilator for a good few years before that. No doubt we'll come back to the Medici next season, but they won't be bankers, so we'll leave it there for the rise and fall. Well, the rise, a lot of wobbling, and fall of the Medici Bank. But they did hang on longer than most.
Cosimo must have been just rolling in his grave.
Yes, and Giovanni de Bisticci, I've forgotten his name, Bisticci de Medici. Yeah, must have been thinking, oh, no, I set that up.
What's wrong with you people?
It's doing so well.
That was frustrating, actually. You're just sitting there thinking, don't be stupid. Don't be... Oh, you're stupid.
Yeah. Constant. But we've done that. Everything we've done about Florence, we felt that.
Yeah. It's like, this is so apparent. Stop. Just stop.
I think because if you've got a city-state like that and you've got lots of powerful families, or a cluster of powerful families, they can't stop. As soon as they stop, they're swamped
Yes.
by the others. They've got to keep going, even if they're thinking it's ridiculous.
Maybe.
I mean, it's not a particularly pleasant situation to be in. But when we were doing Machiavelli, we thought we wouldn't want to live in Florence. You know, it might be lovely, but
No. Where do we want to live?
don't know. Don't know. We can't even live. I just think, well, I'm going to live on a nice hilltop in Tuscany or something, because after a while, Maximilian and these hordes will come sweeping over and take it.
Yeah.
Like he did with Caterina Cornaro. I mean, she made her nice little court.
Yeah.
She got poets and artists and thought, oh God, what's happening now? Who's this
I wonder
now?
what the Canary Islands are doing right now. Are they safe?
No, not great, I don't think, is it? Because they were set up as a trial run for what they were going to do in the West Indies. Yeah.
Okay.
So, no.
Isle of Wight?
Yeah. Yeah, that's all right, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isle of Wight.
You might be pulled for military duty, but there's no actual fighting on the Isle of Wight.
Don't think so.
Famine? We'll have to look up the Isle of Wight during the 1400s, and that's where we're going to be, everybody.
Okay, that's another special episode. The Isle of Wight. Okay, well, I'll pop over to the Isle of Wight and see if I can pick up some nice books about it there. Yeah, I like the Isle of Wight. I know some people say it's boring and it's stuck in the 1970s, but I'm boring and stuck in the 1970s as well.
People say boring, and I'm like, oh, contented, calm. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yeah, it's lovely. And there's a town called Ryde, so if you get the bus, you can get a ticket to Ryde.
Oh, that's cool.
It is. We did that.
Yeah, I like that.
Anyway, this is way off the Medici.
That's the end of our episode on the rise and fall of the Medici Bank. Frustrating.
Thank you for listening and being frustrated along with us.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Stone.